Heads of the world's 20 leading economies will engage in two-day talks over in Rome starting on Saturday. On their agenda are economic recovery efforts amid COVID-19, as well as efforts to tackle climate change. For more, I have Dr. WooJungYeop from Sejong University, from Sejong Institute, that is. My apologies, Dr.
Thanks for having me.
Right. I also have Professor Yang Jung-sok from the Catholic University of Korea. It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor
Happy
Yang.
to be here.
Dr. Wu, we'll start with you then. Let's start with the significance of this first in-person G20 summit amid the pandemic for the international community as well as for President Moon Jae-in.
So as in the East Asia Summit just held before the G20, all the summits after COVID was virtual format. So even though they can discuss over the virtual format on the issues that they want to discuss, but there's something that you can discuss only in person. So it is a great opportunity for President Moon Jae-in to discuss matters with regard to the international role of South Korea, as well as South Korea's immediate issues, such as the End of War Declaration and other issues in bilateral format. So South Korea can discuss at G20 about the climate changes, as you mentioned, and how to boost the economies after the COVID, and also what kind of role that South Korea can play to help other countries to reboost their economies. At the same time, South Korea can take advantage of this opportunity to discuss the End of War Declaration that South Korea is now pushing to improve inter-Korea relations. Also, South Korea can discuss what kind of role that South Korea can play to mediate the tensions between the U.S. and China.
Right. And Professor Yang, what then are the implications of this upcoming summit on the global economy as it seeks to recover from repercussions of the pandemic?
Okay, well, we're facing a lot of economic problems, and a lot of that has to do with the difference in how countries are dealing with the coronavirus. Some countries have gone on complete elimination of distancing measures, while others like Korea are just starting to eliminate distancing. And other countries still have a very high infection rate, and they're still distancing in a very tough manner. It all comes down to how quickly vaccinations are going on. A lot of the most advanced countries are now doing very well on the vaccination rates, including Korea. Some of the mid-level countries, they're on their way to getting vaccinated. But a lot of the least developing countries, a lot of the poorer countries, they haven't really started vaccinations at all. And that's one of the causes that we're seeing so-called supply bottlenecks in the global supply chain. So they're probably going to talk about the supply chain as well as how to deliver vaccines to the least vaccinated countries. Unless most of the countries are going to be vaccinated and most of the countries to reduce their distancing measures, we're probably going to have some aspect of bottleneck continuing. Now, another aspect is because the advanced countries are now moving out of the pandemic emergency economy, they're seeking to raise interest rates. But a lot of the poorer countries and mid-level countries, they have spent a lot of money on corona pandemic. They have built up a very high amount of debt, and they're afraid that once the advanced countries start raising the interest rates, it might cause another, what we saw back in 2013 as a taper tantrum, or even worse, perhaps currency crisis in some countries. This belongs more in the finance ministers meeting, but still, the leaders are going to have to talk about that as well. For Korea, I think they will probably talk about North Korean issues, as Dr. Yu is probably has mentioned, but also because Korea is going on to start anti-distancing measures, to reduce their distancing measures, we're probably going to look at some advice from countries which have already reduced distancing measures, like the United Kingdom, and see what went well, what didn't go well, and what we need to watch out for.
Right. And Dr. Wu, both Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin have cited COVID-19 as reason for not attending the G20 summit in person. What are your thoughts?
So it is true that both President Xi Jinping and President Putin will not attend in person in Rome this week. But it is reported that they are going to participate in the meeting through the virtual connection. So I don't think there's any problem for them to deliver a message from their perspective to the G20 summit. And it's not only those two leaders, like the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida is not going to attend in person for the G20, and many other Western leaders are not going to join in person. So for G20, important issues are already dealt and agreed by ministerial level talks just before the summit. So I really don't think their absence caused a problem for the leaders of G20 to reach a certain agreement. But it certainly lose some kind of opportunity for the leaders to talk more privately, because there's a rumor before G20 that President Biden and President Xi might have some talks to mitigate the tensions between the two countries. So for the purpose of G20, I don't think there's a big problem, but we certainly cannot have certain momentum in diplomacy between the countries who showed some tensions.
Right, I see. Professor Yang, following their G20 agenda in Rome, these leaders will fly to Scotland for the UN Climate Summit, COP26. Now, China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. How does its absence from these efforts or this summit serve to better address efforts to deal with climate change?
Okay, well, it's interesting to see that President Xi and President Putin are among the leaders who will not show up in person, because they seem to play crucial roles in global energy policy and global energy problems. China has promised that they will take major steps to reduce fossil fuels, and they will achieve net zero emissions, but their target date is 2060, which is later than most of the other countries whose targets are 2050. And perhaps even worse than that, they say that at least until about 2030, their coal emission will actually rise, though their coal emission per person or per GDP dollar may fall. So they're on a very tough lens, under the very tough lens in the COP20. That may be one of the reasons why President Xi decided not to show up. But still, recent problems that China have with their electricity generation does show that they are still critically dependent on coal. And other countries, obviously, because coal is probably the dirtiest fuel that they can use, would have pressured President Xi to try to reduce their coal usage more quickly. President Biden may have had a wish to push very strongly on this, but he's now in a very awkward position. Because of the American domestic policy problem, he had to weaken a lot of his environmental policies that he wanted to put in the latest U.S. budget plan, and that includes measures to reduce usage of coal in the United States. One of the senators has said that he would not sign this budget bill if there was a measure to actively reduce the usage of coal. So now he's in a weaker position to pressure China to reduce their coal usage.
Right. And staying with the G20, Professor Yang, what are your prospects on the G20 discussions about skyrocketing oil prices then?
Okay, well, one of the reasons for the high price of oil is the OPEC plus agreement, agreement made between OPEC countries and large non-OPEC oil producers. And the largest player within OPEC is Saudi Arabia. The largest producer in the world is Russia, and they are both part of G20, so I'm sure that there were going to be a lot of pressure there to try to increase the production of oil. And then also, one other reason for the high price of oil is actually high price of natural gas, which is used as heating fuel for Europe. And a lot of energy analysts believe that one of the reasons for high oil prices is because high natural gas prices. And one of the reasons why the natural gas prices are so high is because Russia is limiting exports. And by President Putin not being there, he might not be he might not be there to answer some sensitive questions, but I'm sure that there will be a lot of pressure to try to increase the amount of oil in the short run. And that's also another sort of a paradox here, because on one hand, environmental issues, you want to use less oil, but the current situation requires that there will be more oil production. So that might be a bit of a diplomatic workaround that these leaders would have to do between the G20 meeting and the COP20 meeting. Now, previously, OPEC had feared oil prices going too high because that would bring in U.S. shale oil producers. But for some reason, the shale oil producers in the United States are not really increasing production this time. So the oil producers are encouraged to have higher oil prices, and that may be because of President Biden's environmental protection wishes. But that will encompass perhaps a larger discussion on how the oil production may be increased in the short run, but decreased in the long run.
Essentially, it's a very sensitive issue then.
Oh, very.
Dr. Wu, another important agenda on President Moon Jae-in's trip to Italy is his meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican later on this Friday. Having said that, what are your prospects on the possibility of Pope Francis traveling to North Korea to perhaps facilitate the peace process on the peninsula?
It's not clear yet for two reasons. First, the COVID situation in North Korea is much worse than many other countries. So whether the COVID condition in North Korea can permit other foreign leaders to pay a visit to their country. And second, whether it is politically okay for the Pope to pay a visit to North Korea is another question, even though like COVID situation can allow others to travel into North Korea. So in 2018, when President Moon delivered the message to Pope that North Korean leadership wants Pope to pay a visit to North Korea, it is reported that the Pope said he's available for the visit. So maybe with the Minister of Unification, Lee In-young, the President Moon is going to ask once again Pope to pay a visit if the situation allows, because as we all know that there is no freedom of religion in North Korea, so the the visit paid by the Pope to the North Korea can be very significant. So we don't know yet whether North Korean leadership really wants Pope to visit their country or not, but certainly President Moon is going to ask Pope to pay a visit to North Korea this time.
Right, it would be very symbolic, of course, if the visit is ensured. Doctor, what are your prospects now on the possibility of a summit between Presidents Moon and Biden on the sidelines of the G20 summit?
We don't know yet. It's not officially reported yet whether President Moon is going to have some sideline meeting or like small summit meeting with the President Biden. But there are lots of issues that President Biden should deal with the countries, leaders of other countries at G20, and also the climate conference in Scotland. So we don't know yet what kind of issues can be dealt at the summit level meeting between President Moon and President Biden if there's a meeting happen between two leaders. But certainly if the meeting can be arranged between two leaders, President Moon Jae-in probably propose idea once again that the end of war declaration idea would be great for two countries to tell North Korea to come back to the negotiation. So I think that if the meeting between two leaders are going to happen in Italy, then there's going to be that discussion.
Right. We'll just have to wait and see then. Professor Yang, the world's tax landscape is poised to mark a dramatic change in the year 2023 as the G20 has voiced support for the OECD's proposals to tax the digital economy and to impose a 15% minimum global corporate tax rate. Now, I understand that there remains a lot of technical issues to be resolved. Could you tell us a bit more?
Okay, well, first technical issue to be considered is one of the reasons why we had this tax deal was that some of the European countries, as well as Turkey and India, wanted to impose a so-called digital services tax, where they would tax digital service companies that make profit in their own countries. And this big deal that the OECD made with the large countries and have 130-some countries approving it was designed to replace that. Now, this new tax will apply not only to digital companies, but all largest multinationals, except the multinationals in the finance sector and so-called extraction sectors. That's mostly fuel, oil. Now, the Europeans have agreed, and the 5 European countries who have imposed digital service taxes say that they will remove it as soon as this new deal is actually implemented 2 years from now. But Turkey and India, who are part of the G20, they have not agreed. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen there. And then, as you mentioned, there's a lot of technical details to be worked out. How do you calculate profit in each countries? How do you calculate the overall global profit? Those details need to work out and be agreed upon with all these countries. So only the barest outline has actually been agreed upon so far. More interesting is that all these countries will have to pass this treaty in their legislatures, and at least in the United States, some Republican senators are signaling that they might not approve, not necessarily because of this taxes on multinationals, but the global minimum tax. They think that perhaps this will lead to tax increases in the United States as well. So they're at least signaling that they will not vote for it, which means that President Biden will have to work with just the Democrats to pass this, and that might not be possible, in which case this entire deal may collapse.
I see. Dr. Woo, as you mentioned, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will be attending the G20 Summit virtually. Do you suppose then that hopes for an improvement in Seoul-Tokyo ties using this upcoming summit as a platform may be limited?
So there has been no positive report coming out between two countries about whether two countries can resolve the issues that stymie the relations between two countries. So from Japan's perspective, that it's not the time yet for Japan to unilaterally ease their export control against South Korea. And from South Korean perspective, it's the judiciary decision that executive branch cannot really affect in any part. So even if two leaders decided to meet in Scotland, there is nothing much that they can agree on, because it's so technical issues in South Korea for the judiciary branch. And in Japan, they say that South Korea should move first. So since we have not heard any news about whether one side is going to back up yet, we don't know. So I think that it might be a little difficult for two leaders meet without any pre-arranged deal before they meet in person.
I see. All right, Dr. WooJungYeop from Sejong Institute, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Thank
and
you.
Professor Yang Jun-sung from the Catholic University of Korea, thank you for your time.
Thank you.